Hello, history nerds and historians. My name is Krystina, and this is Effed Up History. This is where we talk about a little tidbit from history that's super fucked up. So, I know it's February, but I am going to say, welcome to 2023. I do ask and request that nobody puts any high expectations on this year. Do not be like, 2023 is gonna be my year. No, please don't. We've all been through enough in the last couple years. Please just do what I am planning on doing and walk into 2023, give 2023 some snacks and a comfy blanket and put on a good comfort movie. I like the movies Love Actually and Robin Hood Men in Tights and also The Princess Bride. Those tend to be my comfort movies, but you go ahead and pick your own, whichever they are, and leave 23 the fuck alone. Okay? We've been through enough. Please consider doing this for me. Okay, so today is part 2 of the Hamilton series where I analyze the women in Alexander Hamilton's life and compare them to how they were depicted in the musical Hamilton, while I simultaneously shit on Ron Chernow and the play, because there is a lot more than what is in the play. And there's a lot of differences than what is in the play. But how did the historical consultant Ron Chernow ever allow this to happen? Is it because he only cared that Hamilton's story was somewhat accurate? Because even that is not great. But anyway, we'll talk about that more as we go. Also, if anyone ever wants to hire me as a historical consultant, I will make sure to do my job properly, because I obviously have a lot of thoughts and do a lot of research. So, up for hire. Just go ahead and reach out. If you're maybe writing a play about a different historical figure, I will gladly be a historical consultant for you. So I'm not going to recap everything we talked about in the last episode. We talked about a lot. We talked about the play, some background about everything, and mostly spent the episode talking about Alexander Hamilton's mother, Rachel Fossett Lavian, who is regarded as the whore in the play and not anything else, and was very much not a whore. So if you missed any of that and need a refresher, go back and listen to the last episode. Like I mentioned in that last episode, I'm going to upload all of these as individual episodes and then upload as a mega episode. I was really trying to just do it all as just one large mega episode, but it just got to be a little bit too much and far too long, and I was getting very overwhelmed. And I just really want to make sure that I take the time to work on this little by little, to honor these people who have not been honored historically because they did not matter. So that's what we're going to do today. I did leave off the last episode by being and that's how he met his wife Eliza, which is a fantastic segue. And I'm going to take advantage of that because today we'll be talking about Eliza and 2 of the other Schuyler sisters that are depicted in the play, Angelica and Peggy. There were other Schuyler sisters as well. Also Schuyler sons. And also children of all of these people that were very important to history that just get completely left out of the play. But today we're going to focus on the 3 sisters that are in the play for the most part. So without further ado, sit back, relax, and practice your, oh good God, what the fuck faces. Editing Krystina here. This episode became completely unhinged. So yeah, enjoy.
Angelica, Eliza, and Peggy, the Schuyler sisters. Angelica, Peggy, Eliza.
So Elizabeth Schuyler was born on August 9th, 1757 in Albany, New York. And on that day, the world started just shining a little bit brighter. And we should honestly celebrate that day every year. I may also be biased because that is my son's birthday. So she was born in New York to Philip Schuyler and Catherine, affectionately known as Kitty Van Rensselaer Schuyler. So Philip Schuyler was a war general during the Revolutionary War. They were extremely wealthy family, although towards the end, not as wealthy as people really thought they were. And they were good people, or at least depicted historically as good people. But I do want to mention that they owned many people who were enslaved. That's the reality of this time period, and I think a lot of people try to just brush past all of this stuff and be like, they did great things, but they also owned people. So by those standards, they weren't that bad of people, but by our standards today, they weren't that great of people. So just gonna say it. Just gonna say it right now. Eliza was one of 8 children. Her mother actually had 15 children total, including 1 set of twins and 1 set of triplets. She was pregnant her entire, just imagine a natural triplets. Like, are you kidding me? Natural triplets is ridiculous. Angelica was the oldest, which if you've seen the play is accurate to that. Then Eliza was next. Margarita, also known as Peggy, was after that. Then John, Philip, Rensselaer. So those were the three sons. Cornelia and Catherine, who was also called Kitty at times. So sons, again, there were three of them, not in the play. About that, Miranda said that he conveniently forgot that Philip Schuyler had sons while he was writing the play, but it was okay because it was in service of a larger point, that Angelica was a world-class intellect in a world that didn't allow her to flex it, which I don't agree with, like, at all. Not the world-class intellect part like she was, but she was very vocal about her beliefs and thoughts, just not many of them were these, like, yeah, feminism, I'm gonna put women in the sequel, yeah, like, that's another part where Miranda got it wrong. Like, maybe today she would have been this, like, feminist icon, but there's nothing that I can find in my own research and from reading other people's analyses that say anything of the sort. Like, she was totally fine with the world that they lived in because she benefited from it greatly as a white upper class woman who married into a rich family as well, you know? Eliza was born into a world at war. Not the Revolutionary War. That hadn't started yet, obviously, but there was the French and Indian War that was sweeping through New York and a lot of, like, the area, like, just west of the American colonies. So basically, for anyone who doesn't know about that war, it was fought between France and Great Britain. It lasted 9 years, from 1754 to 1763, and it was just basically about land. So there were the British colonies along the eastern coast, and then you had, like, the French throughout Canada, and this land that they were fighting over was in the Ohio River Valley, which is just this, like, large chunk of land that's along the Ohio River that's almost 1,000 miles long, starting in around, like, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and going all the way into Cairo, Illinois. So the Ohio River Valley is, like, the area of land that surrounds the Ohio River. So it goes, like, as far north as southwestern New York, spreads throughout western Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, and then it ends in New York. There's even, like, little parts of it that are, like, in upper Alabama and Georgia. So it's, like, this large chunk of land, but for the most part, it's outside the colonies of the two countries. And the reason why it's called the French and Indian War is because both the French and the English employed the aid of indigenous people in the area. This wasn't really anything new. Even later on during the American Revolution, there were indigenous people allying with the two sides. If I recall correctly, I think that they tended to side more with the British, because the idea kind of was like, oh, well, if, like, Britain wins, then maybe the colonists will leave, or the indigenous people, as a way to say thanks and pay them back for all of their help, will be given land, which, of course, unfortunately for them, did not happen. Yeah, the indigenous history in this country is bananas. So Philip Schuyler, Eliza's dad, owned, like, 2,000 acres that was in this, like, highly contested area in New York. So her family was very much in the war. Her cousin was actually James Fenimore Cooper, who wrote The Last of the Mohicans, which is all about the French and Indian War. I haven't read it, nor have I watched more than the first 5 minutes of the movie, so I can't personally comment on how historically accurate that is, but maybe at some point I will. Eliza was educated, but very little of it was formal education. She learned a lot with her mother, which was just typical for women during this time period. In the 1780s, Thomas Jefferson wrote this schedule for his daughters, and it kind of shows, like, what was expected for upper class girls as far as their education went. It included practicing music, drawing, reading, writing letters, practicing penmanship. They often did know their letters and numbers at a young age, but it was usually from learning embroidery and, like, other crafts that they were expected to do. You know, like those period pieces where it's just, like, women sitting in a sitting room, like, on a couch and just being, like, you know, constantly embroidering, like, the little needlepoint kind of things, anything like that. Like, that's pretty accurate when you see that in the different, like, time period movies. Their education was usually done by the time they were 16. It said that Eliza didn't really like writing. She was very self-conscious about her penmanship. She didn't do well with her French lessons. This kind of factors in later because we don't have much from Eliza as far as letters that she wrote, and a lot of people think that she destroyed them because of, like, this lack of self-esteem that she had. I don't know if I fully believe that, but that's sort of like the, you know, historically widely accepted reasoning why we don't have a lot of letters from her. So Eliza was described as brunette with very dark eyes that held a gaze that was frank and open, she was kind of described as being a little bit of a tomboy. She didn't wear a lot of makeup. She was athletic and energetic. She was very strong. There was a time that I read that she climbed this like really, really steep hill by herself when everyone else needed help. And she just like refused for anybody to help her. And she climbed this like really, really, really steep hill that people were falling down. And it just kind of shows like the mental tenacity that she has. Eliza and Hamilton met when Hamilton was sent to negotiate with a man named General Horatio Gates. Gates had just won this like big battle in Saratoga in New York, and Washington was trying to get him to give up some of his troops and send them south during the Revolutionary War. So Washington drafted this letter, but left the actual negotiation processes up to Hamilton. So Hamilton traveled like 300 miles to go talk to this guy. He arrived in Albany on November 5th, 1777. So while he was there, he met with his old college roommate, Robert Troup, and went and had dinner at Major General Philip Schuyler's house. And during the visit at the end of 1777, he met Eliza. So nothing really happened at this meeting that we have on record, but the introductions were made. But Hamilton honestly really had no interest in getting married at this point. He had really no interest in being in a relationship at this point, at least not with a woman. He apparently told a friend at one point that he didn't think a soldier should be married to anyone other than the military. And honestly, when you think about his experiences with marriage at this point, with his mother going through a terrible divorce and then getting abandoned by his father, and his benefactor having to sneak onto a ship to leave her husband in the middle of the night, it's not very surprising. But the same year that he met Eliza, he also met John Laurens, the man who many historians have described as his very, very best friend in the whole wide world. Much the way Achilles and Patroclus were friends, I believe personally. So by 1779, Hamilton was talking love with John Laurens. So Chernow quotes this letter from April of that year, specifically the end of this letter, where Hamilton talks about what he's looking for in a wife. Hamilton makes this whole big long list. He said she had to be young, attractive, rich, in good shape, sensible, rich, educated, but not too educated, because then she would be able to see him for what he really was. I guess she had to be well-bred, rich, obviously, chaste, because fidelity was very important to him, damn it. She had to have a good nature. She had to be generous, but not too concerned with money. But of course she had to have money. He didn't want someone who was really into politics, because he didn't want to deal with political debates or a woman sort of trying to talk back and acting like she knew anything. He didn't care where she fell on the political spectrum, because he was confident that he would be able to easily sway her to his side, because it was just so smart and convincing when it came to that. She had to be religious, but not too religious, and she also couldn't be a nag, and I'm thinking I'm missing, so she had to be rich. So he wasn't picky at all in all of these things that he was finding his wife. So this is what Chernow sort of cites in his book. The interesting thing is that I initially pulled that information from Chernow, took it down in my notes, and started writing this part. And then I was like, you know what? Let me just read the actual letter for myself, because I want to do my due diligence as a historian and your friendly neighborhood historical consultant right now, right? So I'm serious about my services being for hire. So reading the original letter, it puts a little bit more context to what he was saying of these goals for a woman that was unattainable, pretty much, right? To find a woman that hits every single one of these boxes, to be rich and good-natured and not political, but cared about politics, and chaste, and also not a nag, and religious, but not too religious. All of this seems it's just unattainable. And I think that there's a reason why when you read this letter, because this is a letter to John Laurens, and when you read it, it seems like Hamilton is wholeheartedly confessing his love for Laurens, on the record. Now, the people that will say no, they were just friends, use this justification of romantic friendship that a lot of people practiced, where it wasn't uncommon to speak in flowery language and tell your friends that you loved them and call them dear or anything like that, right? So this kind of coincides with the romantic movement in the late 18th and early 19th century. Poets like William Wordsworth, John Keats, Percy Shelley, they became popular with their poetry slightly later than this letter was written, but it's reflective of the time period that was happening. However, this letter goes just like a little bit farther than that, in my opinion, at least. So let's see if you think the same. I'm just going to like read you part of the letter. Okay, so it begins. Cold in my professions, warm in my friendships, I wish, my dear Lawrence, it might be in my power, by action rather than words, to convince you that I love you. I shall only tell you that till you bade us adieu. I hardly knew the value you had taught my heart to set upon you. Indeed, my friend, it was not well done. You know the opinion I entertain of mankind, and how much it is my desire to preserve myself free from particular attachments, and to keep my happiness independent of the caprice of others. You should not have taken advantage of my sensibility to steal into my affection without my consent. But as you have done it, and as we are genuinely indulgent to those that we love, I shall not scruple to pardon the fraud you have committed, on condition that for my sake, if not for your own, you will always continue to merit the partiality which you have so artfully and still need to be. So Hamilton goes on in this letter to talk about how he wishes that the enemy was gone so that they could be together again. He gives some like political advice and some updates, and then says that he received a letter from a woman in England who claims to be Lawrence's wife, which is the fraud that he's mentioning, where he says like he's not going to scruple to pardon the fraud that he had committed, right? Because nobody knew that Lawrence was married. He kept it a complete secret, right? So like he left England and he left his wife behind, and he also left a daughter behind. Because then Hamilton goes on and says that in this letter, she talks about the daughter that they have together that also nobody knew about. And then after all of that, Hamilton talks about what he looks for in a wife. These unattainable goals. It's almost like Hamilton is trying to make him jealous. Like, if you have a wife, then I can have one too. And she's going to be fucking perfect. But at the end of the letter, after he says all of this stuff and confesses his love and explains what he looks for in his wife, he just like outright says that he doesn't want a wife at all. But all of that was apparently forgotten when he saw Eliza again. So in February of the next year, 1780, Eliza rolls into Morristown with her family and friends and military escorts. And that seemingly like unattainable list that he had of what he was looking for in a wife, yeah, Eliza hit like every single mark. And pretty soon he was spending like pretty much every evening at the Schuyler residence. And he seemed to be so distracted and in love that people were saying that he was an absolute goner. Like there's one story about how he like went back to the barracks, and I guess they had like a different password that they would do all the time to stop people from just being able to like break into the barracks. And he was so distracted from being with Eliza that he couldn't remember the password, and they made him sleep outside of the barracks as like a way to teach him. They were all like, we know who he was, but if we let him in, then we have to let other people in as well. So they're just gonna hold everyone to like the highest standards. It's hilarious. I will say that at the same time as he's courting Eliza, Lawrence was not around. He was in another state. He was like fighting on a different front. And within a month of meeting, they were talking about marriage. He even wrote to Eliza's sister, Peggy, not Angelica, as we see in the play, because Peggy's only importance in the play is to be like a whining child, which we will get to. So in this letter, he basically admitted that Eliza ticked every box from that letter from the year before to John Lawrence. He told Peggy that by some off contrivance, he was totally smitten by Eliza. He said that she was, quote, unmercifully handsome, but didn't know it or didn't seem to be affected by it. She had a good nature. She was charming as hell, saying, quote, in short, she is so strange a creature that she possesses all the beauty, virtues, and graces of the sex without any of the amiable defects which are esteemed by connoisseurs necessary shades in the character of a fine woman. Which sounds wonderful when it's in this like flowery language. But also, what do you think of women on the whole, my dude? Just wondering. But interestingly enough, when he wrote to John Lawrence at the end of March, when he's talking to Eliza about marriage, he doesn't mention her at all. This woman who was so unmercifully handsome and so wonderful when compared to the rest of women. In fact, he doesn't mention her at all until the end of June, Which is interesting, because in the letter to Peggy, he's building up Eliza to be this like great beauty and wonderful woman. And yet in that letter to John in June, he writes, quote, I give up my liberty to Miss Schuyler. She is a good-hearted girl who I am sure will never play the termagant, which I had to look up. It means like an ill-tempered woman. Though not a genius, she has a good sense enough to be agreeable. And though not a beauty, she has fine black eyes, is rather handsome, and has every other requisite of the exterior to make a love happy. And believe me, I am lover in earnest, though I do not speak of the perfections of my mistress in the enthusiasm of chivalry. Which seems a little bit like he's trying to make Lawrence jealous and be like, yeah, we fuck all the time, but they didn't. We'll talk about it in a couple minutes. There's other letters where he is like very sexually frustrated that they have not slept together yet, which I think is hilarious. And then in another letter to Lawrence, he wrote, quote, in spite of Schuyler's black eyes, I have still a part for the public and another for you. So your impatience to have me married is misplaced. A strange care, by the way, as if after matrimony, I was to be less devoted than I am now. That last part is just like totally things that friends say to each other, right? Historians. So it sounds like to me that Hamilton wrote this letter saying like, oh my God, she's so wonderful. We fuck all the time. Like, yeah. And Lawrence got jealous and like tried to break off their relationship. And it's probably just this like long quote unquote lost letter. And then this one is just damage control of Hamilton telling his boyfriend like not to worry about it, that they live in a time where he has to marry a woman and do his due diligence. And to the public, he will seem like he is happily married. But behind closed doors, he belongs to Lawrence and Lawrence alone, right? What? When you look at the letters that he wrote to Eliza, they were also full of love. So I think Hamilton was trying to just be in this like bisexual polygamous relationship, which nowadays would be totally fine. Back then, not so much. So like, again, LGBT history is just a sad history, right? So the letters that he writes to Eliza are gorgeous. He writes, quote, love is a sort of insanity, and everything I write savors strongly of it. He wrote, 'tis a pretty story indeed that I am to be thus monopolized by a little nut-brown maid like you, and am from a soldier metamorphosed into a puny lover. And so when I first read that, I was like, nut-brown maid? The fuck? But it was actually like a reference to this really cute love ballad that was really popular at the time. So it's basically like he's like singing like All of You by John Legend to her, right? He also wrote, you are certainly a little sorceress and have bewitched me, for you have made me disrelish everything that used to please me, and have rendered me as restless and unsatiated with all about me, as if I was the inhabitant of another world and had nothing in common with this. Way better than you strike me as a woman who has never been satisfied. He said, I was once determined to let my existence and American liberty end together, but my Betsy has given me motive to outlive my pride. Come on! He talked a lot about their future. He built her palaces and cathedrals out of paragraphs, but he also kept her expectations low, saying, hey, I don't come from anything. I don't have family money. I don't know what my position will be after this war. And although when he wrote that letter to Lawrence, he specified he wanted a wealthy wife, he didn't. He didn't care. He didn't want to mooch off of the Schuylers. He said specifically, like, if you're not prepared for the potential of a very humble and modest life, then we should stop this while we're ahead. And before we enter into a marriage that's destined to be unhappy. And it is unsurprising that the future Secretary of Treasury thinks that the only thing that can really destroy a marriage is money. That is a big issue that a lot of people have, but also like making time for each other and being faithful are also important. And Hamilton probably also should have had that in mind when he wrote these letters, because those are the issues that he has in his marriage later on. And I mean, it was not all romantic. I'm definitely cherry picking, especially when you read the parts that Chernow didn't include in his book. Like, I'm just going to say, do yourself a favor. If you ever want to read Chernow, it is a wealth of information. You will learn a lot. But when he quotes a letter, go find the whole letter. They're available online through the National Archives. Chernow definitely seems to have like cut parts out that don't paint Alexander in the best light, and that's probably one of the reasons why I and others find his book a little bit problematic, because it like deifies Alexander when he was a person, you know, like people are not like all good or all bad. They have their moments. So some of like the more negative parts of the relationship between Alexander and Eliza Hamilton. So he doubted her and her abilities to live a modest life, not because of her upbringing, but because of that whole like, wow, what do you really think of women, my dude? So he writes her this one letter. He begins talking about this like beautiful little song that Eliza had written him. So in the letter that he wrote right before this, he had asked her like this series of questions about how she could live and made these comments of if she could be the Roman wife, which by that he basically means like a woman that can be really strong in spite of everything and like run the home no matter what and have lots of babies and do her due diligence as a wife. So he writes, quote, "For all the proofs I have of your tenderness and readiness to share every kind of fortune with me, it is a presumptuous diffidence of your heart to propose the examination I did. But be assured, my angel, it is not a diffidence of my Betsy's heart, but of a female heart that dictated the questions. I am ready to believe everything in favor of yours, but I am restrained by the experience I have had of human nature, and of the softer part of it, by which, of course, he means women. Some of your sex possess every requisite to please, delight, and inspire esteem, friendship, and affection, but there are too few of this description. We, meaning men, are full of vices. They, meaning women, are full of weakness. And though I am satisfied whenever I trust my senses and my judgment that you are one of the exceptions, I cannot forbear having moments when I feel a disposition to make a more perfect discovery of your temper and character. In one of those moments, I wrote the letter in question. Do not, however, I entreat you, suppose that I entertain an ill opinion of all your sex. I pray you do not think your sex injured, and undertake to be their champion." I will be the champion against misogyny. I volunteer as tribute, Eliza. Don't worry, babe. I wouldn't want you to get punished by your husband. Let's talk about what I mean by that. So Alexander was also a little controlling. So he told her to read more and how he expected her to act and take care of herself. He got mad at Eliza when she didn't write as much as he wanted her to, even though she was like known to be self-conscious about her writing. To the point where in one of his letters, he said, and I quote, "I write you at least 3 letters for your one, though I am immersed in public business, and you have nothing to do but to think of me. When I come to Albany, I shall find means to take satisfaction for your neglect. You recollect the mode I threatened to punish you in for all your delinquencies." He's the dude that texts you 17 times before you've even had a chance to respond, and then just starts like sending you question marks if you don't respond right away. You know, it's like, "I'm sorry that I stepped away from my phone for a second to take a shower, Aaron." Sorry, that was a blast from my past. I met Alexander. Also, I have questions. Like how are you going to punish her, Alex? This is either like Christian Grey, or a crime. To be fair, 50 Shades of Grey should have been a crime, but that is a topic of discussion for another day. Perhaps if I ever start that other podcast that I was talking about books. So despite all of this controlling nature, they continued on in their correspondences. And on August 8th, 1780, the day before her birthday, the same day he wrote her the letter threatening to punish her, Philip and Kitty Schuyler gave their blessing to their marriage, which took place on December 14th, 1780 at the Schuyler Mansion. Hamilton didn't really have like a lot of people to invite. He invited his brother, who didn't come, and his father, who also didn't come, even though he literally begged him in like multiple letters to come. Hamilton's father never even met Eliza or any of their children, and this was something that really bothered Hamilton, and I get it, 100%. But Hamilton, babe, as someone whose father also abandoned them at a young age, just move on. Life is better off without them, I promise. Like, he would not have offered anything to you that would have benefited you or your children in any way. And for anyone who is also dealing with these kinds of feelings, that advice extends to you as well. If someone does not treat you like the diamond that you are, feel free to treat them like coal and use that coal to fuel the fire to light the bridges that you will burn. That was maybe not the best metaphor. I'm not suggesting you light people on fire and commit arson. Just metaphorically, burn those bridges when people don't treat you right, because I don't care who they are. I don't care if they're your mom, your dad, your grandfather, your partner. Like, if they don't treat you right, cut them out. It's not worth it, especially if you have kids. Like, you need to set an example of what love is for your kids, right? Something I'm going through. I don't have contact with either one of my parents anymore because of that. So anyway, so a couple of weeks later, he wrote to Peggy saying, quote, because your sister has the talent of growing more amiable every day, or because I am a fanatic in love, or both, she fancies herself the happiest woman in the world. But a lot of people say, and even the play says, that Eliza would not have been the sister that he would have chosen if he would have had his pick. He actually, according to some people, would have picked her older sister, Angelica. So again, that is in the play. Angelica's older sister. She was uncontestedly beautiful. She had a long, pale face, dark eyes, and a pretty full-lipped mouth. That is the description from Chernow, which very much sounds like a description from a man. She was well-dressed, sophisticated. She was said to have a mysterious femininity about her. She was powerful and seductive. She was very well-educated. And she liked to discuss politics and books and current events and hold everyone's attention. She spoke French, for God's sake. So why didn't they get married if she was such a match for Hamilton? Was it like the play portrays that Eliza was in love and Angelica was a doting big sister who put her personal feelings aside for her family and her sister, even though she knew she would never be happy, she would never be satisfied? No. First off, she completely goes against Hamilton's list for what he was looking for in a wife. And also, she was already married with 2 kids and pregnant with a third when they met Alexander. So Angelica Schuyler was the oldest child of the Schuyler clan. She was born February 20th of 1756. A lot of her upbringing was similar to Eliza, but she had a lot more confidence than her sister did. She really took to her lessons. She spoke fluent French. She was an amazing dancer. She knew politics and current events, and all of this was from a young age, and she was very charming with the boys, including one man named John Carter that she met when she was about 20 years old in 1776. So John Carter was an officer in the army who was born in England. No one really knew anything else about him and his past, but apparently he did not pass Daddy Schuyler's vibe check. He thought that John Carter might have actually been a British spy that infiltrated the American army, and he told his daughters that John Carter was bad news and to just stay away. But it's like when you tell someone a plate is hot and not to touch it, like, they're going to touch it. And Angelica decided that she wanted to touch John Carter. She decided she was madly in love with him. And they wrote like these secret letters to each other, and she would sneak out in the night to go see him, but her parents would never approve. So she ran away and eloped. They got married on June 21st, 1777. Now, something that we talked about a lot in my American Revolutions class that started this whole podcast is that there was not a revolution. There were revolutions, plural. It was different for everyone based on their lives and stations. So for women, revolutions could look like making their own choices when it came to who their husbands would be. So whether that meant eloping or becoming pregnant and leaving no other option, it was a time of revolution for women. We actually looked at this one table that a historian compiled of like wedding dates and births of first children. And during this time period, there was a large uptick of premature babies, if you get my drift, because people didn't have sex before marriage. Philip and Kitty Schuyler were not okay with Angelica and John's marriage. They were most likely going to disown her for this, which would have left her in a very, very bad place because John Carter could not support her, especially when the truth came out. See, John Carter wasn't John Carter at all. He was actually John Church. He wasn't a British spy. He actually came from a really good family, a really rich family in England. Very, very similar family to the Schuyler family. His parents died when he was young. He was raised by a wealthy uncle, and he did what many rich kids do, and he gambled a lot of it away. And when his uncle found out just how much debt he was in, something equivalent to about like $1.5 million today, which I would pay money just to see $1.5 million, he was like, your partying days are over, John. They're behind you. It's time for you to settle down. You're going to marry the daughter of my wealthy associate. You're going to get your shit together. You're going to start a family. And John refused. So his uncle cut him off, refused to pay off his debts, and soon these like money sharks were coming for him. So he changed his name to John Carter and fled to the American colonies and joined the army, but not before he participated in a duel, which was illegal in England. So now he had the police after him as well in England. So he was able to build a new life in America and very much supported the Patriot cause, but people did not think that he was a good match for Angelica, according to her family. But the damage was already done. She was already married. The marriage was consummated. The scandal was already out. So the character of Angelica in the play Hamilton is almost entirely fictionalized, which is so fucking frustrating and probably one of my biggest issues with the play. So we'll talk about it more. But one of the things that I got right was there was this like flirty and emotional affair between her and Hamilton, but it wasn't necessary to erase her entire history to make a super dramatic love triangle. You didn't need to turn her into this feminist icon that people can look up to and then find out that she didn't stand for any of that at all and create this completely fictionalized character strictly for plot's sake when all you could have still had, like, you could have still had the love triangle angle. You could have still had Hamilton and Angelica meet, and instead of being this little like self-sacrificing, I can't ever be happy, but I'll make sure my sister is happy while I engage in an emotional affair with her husband, which can hurt way more, you could have had Angelica sing about not being satisfied. Like her song Satisfied could still be about how she was unsatisfied, and make it that she shouldn't have been impulsive, and maybe like she should have waited because John Carter / Church wasn't that different from Hamilton, and it could have been played on, like, could have played on the jealousy of her sister's happiness and regret and you know, that maybe she should have waited, and it still could have had that cool like rewind thing. We could have seen Angelica's relationship, and then we could have like jumped to like this alternate reality where like we look at things from a different perspective, that maybe it was Hamilton that she ran away with, and then at the end when the song comes back to reality, she isn't standing with Hamilton, she's standing with John Church, and he's leading her away from Hamilton to England, and she looks at her husband and then looks over her shoulder at Hamilton, who's looking towards Eliza but really looking towards her and making eye contact with Angelica, and that's when she says, I will never be satisfied. Like, that would have been equally as moving. It would have spoken to the hearts of a lot of people and created a lot more depth to the emotional affair that they had, but it also would have not painted Angelica in the best light. So we obviously couldn't have had that, because we can paint everyone else in terrible lights, but we can't place Angelica in a terrible light, even though that would have been historically accurate. Like, come on! She literally, like, helps one of her friends cheat on her husband with Thomas Jefferson! Like, come on! This week's Unhinged Historical Rant was brought to you by Stoke Cold Brew, not sponsored. Now let's get back to Eliza. So by August of the next year, Eliza's pregnant. She's doing everything that she is supposed to do. She is the good little obedient wife, and she is fertile. Like, what more could you possibly ask for, am I right? So we know that she was pregnant at this point because there was a pretty significant event that happened on August 7th of 1781. So on that day, Angelica, Eliza, and Peggy were at their parents' house. It was pretty common for them to go see their parents during the summer, especially because they wanted to get away from the city at that point. And a lot of people would get sick during the summer. There's like this contagious and communicable disease, like epidemics during that time, that you just sort of see as this like theme throughout the entirety of any biography that you'll read about Hamilton and Eliza, or really anyone during this time. So everyone was just sort of like hanging out downstairs. It was a pretty quiet night when out of nowhere they were ambushed by 20 British and indigenous people who were trying to kill Philip Schuyler, or at least take him as a prisoner of war. So these like 20-ish people, they incapacitate the guards that are outside keeping watch. They were very much overpowered very quickly, and they're all looking for weapons. Like the Schuylers are looking for weapons to try and defend themselves, when they remember that Angelica had actually taken like all of the weapons that were in the house and put them in the cellar after she caught her son playing with them. So everyone is pretty much defenseless. They run upstairs to try to put some space between them and these people who are now out for their blood, when they realize that they left a baby downstairs. So Kitty Schuyler, Angelica, Eliza, and Peggy's mother, at the age of 47, had just given birth to baby Catherine, and she was sleeping downstairs when they ran up, and they sort of like forgot about her in their panic. So Kitty is distraught, obviously, that if the baby wakes up or starts crying. Like, it's very possible that the people attacking in their home will kill the baby or hurt her or possibly hold her as ransom. Like, nothing positive can come out of this. And Angelica and Eliza don't want to go downstairs because they're both pregnant. Angelica has children at this point that she needs to try and stay alive for. And this is Eliza's first pregnancy. So she's like very scared of what might happen. So Peggy looks at everyone and then picks up her skirt and runs downstairs. So we're going to pause right there in this story to fucking talk about Peggy. Like, she is not an annoying little child. She is a badass. When I grow up, I want to be Peggy. So Margarita Schuyler, better known as Peggy, was born on September 19th, 1758. She was the third oldest child and only a year younger than Eliza. So why, in the play Hamilton, is she depicted as a child? Like, you would think that she is 12 years old because she's like, Daddy doesn't want us to go to war. Like, I'm not alone in thinking that she is a child when I first watched this. The HikoNico Notebook video that I mentioned in the last part, it has this part where they're talking about, like, when Hamilton, like what Hamilton's going to look like when it becomes available to the public. And it questions if there are going to be like a lot of fully white casts in the guise of being historically accurate. And then like what that means for the utilization of hip hop. And that there are already people doing this on YouTube of having like completely white casts being like, this is more historically accurate. And they show a clip of one of them in the Schuyler Sisters song where Peggy is a child. Like, literally, she's so small that she's doing that game that children do where they like hold two adults' hands and then they're like, 1, 2, 3, swing, ha! Like, she's not a child. When Hamilton was wooing Eliza and sending letters to Peggy about how much he loved her sister, she was 22 years old. That's the same year in the play when the Winter's Ball was happening. So she was 22 years old. Anyway, not going to go on a long historical rant of that one. I've already scared my neighbors with my last one about Angelica. So much of Peggy's upbringing was the same as Angelica and Eliza's. She was regarded by a lot of people as being the most beautiful of the Schuyler sisters, and it seems like she was possibly even more flirtatious than Angelica. A lot of guys wanted to marry her, and she seemed to like kind of entertain it. Hamilton sort of like made fun of her about it at one point and offered to write a play starring her called The Way to Get Him for the benefit of all single ladies who desire to be married. Yeah. So this continues in a letter that Hamilton wrote to Eliza in September of 1780, the same one where he asks her not to be a champion for women that he has offended in his letter. And he asks if Peggy has said anything about this guy that was really into her, and that he expected that she would have outstripped Eliza in the hymeneal line, which we can see a number of things from this. That Hamilton was sure that Peggy would lose her virginity if she had not already. It also shows, what I was kind of getting at a little bit earlier, that he was lying to Lawrence, because it shows a little bit of sexual frustration on Hamilton's part, because by that it means that even though they're engaged, Eliza has not had sex with him yet. And it also shows that he's really, really close to Peggy. So there are a number of letters back and forth between Peggy and Eliza, but also he feels like he can confide in her because in this fantastic letter, the same one, again to Eliza, he talks about one of the camp ladies that's recently arrived, described as a beautiful, young, innocent, and simple Dutch little girl of 15, and says that everyone makes love to her, and she receives everybody kindly and grants everything that's asked, but he's determined that she has no soul, and he requires a soul in a woman, and he refuses to become one of her captives. Like, how romantic. He's like, you're not fucking me. I could fuck this little Dutch girl, 15-year-old Dutch girl who, like, everyone's making a train on. Like, I could just choo-choo on in there, but I won't. Because she's a prostitute and she doesn't have a soul. But you have a soul. And you should be rewarding me for not fucking her. And And then Hamilton is like, see, I give you an account of all the pretty females I meet with, but you tell me nothing of the pretty fellows that you see. And I know that you're going to tell me that there's no one else, but I've heard through the grapevine that you're a little bit of a flirt. So when Peggy comes back, I'm just going to ask her about it because I don't trust you. Like, pure paragraph palaces there, folks. So romantic. If this is what was in the letters that Eliza kept, what was in the ones that she burned? So, in 1783, Peggy turns 25, and she still was not married. This was not old for this time period. I think a lot of people have this perception that, like, in the 16 and 1700s, people got married when they were, like, 12. Something which was just not the case very often. I read this, like, really intense analysis that said that the average age of marriage in 1780 was 22 to 23 years old. So she actually was, like, not that far above the average age range, right? But Peggy did eventually get married to a man named Stephen Van Rensselaer, who was a patroon. I did not know what that meant, so I had to look it up. Patroon is like someone who has manorial rights over a large plot of land, which means he was very wealthy. And also, the Van Rensselaer part of his name, means that she was his first cousin. So Mazzeo describes him. Talar Mazzeo, she's one of the people who, like, wrote a pseudo-biography of Eliza Hamilton. Like, it's touted as a biography, but it's like a narrative history or narrative biography, meaning that a lot of it is like, she looked out of the window and cried, a single solitary tear running down her cheek as she rubbed her swollen, pregnant belly. Like, where did you get that from? I don't know. She didn't write that in a diary. We don't have anything from her. So how do you know that she looked out of the window and cried a single solitary tear? My person? Like, so Talar Mazzeo, in this book, is she talking about, like, Peggy and the relationship between Peggy and Stephen. And she writes, the young teenage patroon, he was 18 at the time, took one look at his sexy and sarcastic older cousin, the now 24-year-old Peggy Schuyler, and became infatuated. I can't get over this biography. Like, there is no factual evidence for her, for that happened. And by that, I mean, like, what he was thinking and all. Like, obviously he was attracted to her because they got married and had children. But why did you have to include his thoughts? And why did you have to include him thinking that his cousin was sexy? Like, I think that's the line that made me truly be like, wow, I really hate this book. And it's not that I have an issue with the whole cousin thing, like I do for nowadays, but, like, it was common for cousins to marry, as uncomfortable as that makes us now. It's just, like, why did you have to describe it like that? Please cease and desist and rethink how you write books, Talar Mazzeo. So, that summer of 1783, good old cousin Steve comes back from Harvard and pretty much immediately proposes, but their parents didn't approve. Not because her mother was a sister of his father, but because they felt that Stephen was too young to be thinking of marriage. Plus, Stephen's uncle, who was his guardian growing up, thought Peggy was being opportunistic because Stephen Van Rensselaer to this day is still regarded as one of the wealthiest people in American history. So depending on the source that I read, accounting for inflation, he was worth between $68 and $101 billion at the time of his death, which is more than Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook is worth. For comparison, the richest person in the world right now is Bernard Arnault, who's worth $214 billion. Elon Musk is worth $178.3 billion, and Jeff Bezos is worth $126.3 billion. So this dude was rich, and Peggy knew how to pick him. So what if their kids came out deformed because they were cousins? The Targaryens have been wedding brothers and sisters for centuries, and don't even get me started on any of the royal families. So Philip Schuyler probably remembers what happened the last time he told a daughter that she couldn't marry someone, and he whisked the family to Saratoga to give Peggy and Stevie some space. And one morning they go to wake up Peggy and she's not there because she ran off and eloped with Stephen. So as you can see, she's got moxie. We love Peggy. So let's get back to August 7th of 1781. So this is before she's married, before any of that stuff happens, right? So she's upstairs. The baby is downstairs. Everyone is panicking. So Peggy goes to get the baby as their home is being ransacked by at least 20 armed men. She has no weapons because, remember, Angelica hid all of them in the cellar because they didn't have gun safes back then, and her baby was pulling a Luke Skywalker and gazing directly into this dangerous weapon. So Peggy goes downstairs. She grabs the baby. She's in the process of running back upstairs when a tomahawk flies past her head, narrowly missing her, and embeds itself into the banister. And she stops, baby in her arms, having almost just been killed. And the men assume that she's a servant, because why would a well-respected Schuyler family member risk a daughter to go get a baby? So she turns and looks at them, and they're like, wench, where is your master? And she just real chill is like, oh, Philip Schuyler? Yeah, he's already gone. He's alerting the town that y'all are here. Like, did you really think that you could just break into his house and just like, we wouldn't have a plan for this? Like, are you guys serious right now? Mind you, Philip Schuyler is upstairs along with the rest of these Schuyler women. He has not gone anywhere. If these men did not believe her, they could have easily gone upstairs, saw him there, and it all could have ended a lot different for the Schuyler family. But the men believed her, and they fled because Peggy is the fucking goat. And when Alexander heard about this, he wrote a letter to Eliza saying that her father, not Peggy, but her father, showed an admirable presence of mind and has given his friends a double pleasure arising from the manner of saving himself and his safety. When he was hiding upstairs, and Peggy saved everyone's ass because of her presence of mind, they would have all died if it wasn't for her. Justice for Peggy, who's depicted as a child in the play. I'm very angry today. So, the three oldest Schuyler sisters are married, 2 of which eloped. Actually, most of the Schuyler daughters eloped. I know for sure that 3 out of the 5 did. One source I read said 4 out of 5 did, meaning that if that is the case, Eliza was the only one who did everything by the book, if you will. So, in July of 1783, Angelica went to England with her husband and 3.5 kids. So the play did get that right, that she went to England. She didn't find a wealthy husband, but rather her husband found wealth around that time. John Church, as he started going by again, was able to go back to England, pay off his debts and all, and like, the play's claim that he wasn't a lot of fun may have been true based solely on the letters that we have from him. He seemed to be very, like, curt and to the point, but we weren't there to know for sure how he was. Also, he gambled. Like, I feel like during that time, like, he had to be kind of fun to, like, gamble and stuff, but, like, who knows? Schuyler's just all had a lot of children as well, although not all of them were lucky enough to survive to adulthood. Most of Eliza's did, thankfully. I've shat on Alexander enough in the last 15 minutes that I won't read the wonderful letter about how he was expecting a boy because a daughter of theirs would have probably been a slut. You can look that one up for yourself if you want to. I hope his 2 daughters never looked that one up, though. So, in addition to the many, many children that Eliza had with Alexander, she also adopted quite a few children, the first of which was a little girl named Fanny Antle. And this is where I start to have yet another issue with the play and Chernow, with this idea of, like, the only reason that Eliza founded the orphanage was because of Alexander being an orphan, because she was passionate about giving children homes, like, very, very early into their marriage, and potentially even before that. Fanny's mother was one of Eliza's closest friends. Her name was Marie Charlotte Antle, and she died from complications due to childbirth with Fanny. And so Fanny stayed with the Hamiltons, sort of just like as a bonus child until she was 12 years old, even after Fanny became an actual orphan when her family died a couple years later after the Hamiltons took her in. They would have kept her for like as long as it took for her to get married. But when Fanny was 12, her older sister was married and secure enough to take her in, but they all kept in touch. They were all extremely close for the rest of Eliza's life. Like, there are instances of Fanny coming to see Eliza to the end of Eliza's life. And another thing about this whole idea that it was just because of Alexander that bothers me is that Alexander was barely ever home. So she was taking care of all of the children when they were young, in addition to multiple orphans over the years. Eliza ran the household. She also took on educating all of the children, including in her religious beliefs, and she became the family bookkeeper. Like, I read that people made fun of Alexander Hamilton, that he was the Secretary of Treasury and responsible for the nation's finances, but not his own. But he would assure her in letters that even though they weren't together, there wasn't a husband alive that could compete with him when it came to fidelity and affection. And he was being very affectionate to Angelica, and she was to him as well, and used to chastise Eliza for not taking care of him well enough, which, like, back the fuck off, girl. He's not your husband. I would start throwing hands if someone spoke to me this way about my husband. Although it seems like Angelica actually started some of the affair that you see in the play. So there's this like whole thing in a play where she's like, I noticed a comma in the middle of a phrase. It changed the meaning. Did you intend this? One mark or stroke or whatever, and you've a something or whatever. Basically, he writes, my dearest Angelica, but he puts a comma after dearest. So he's written, my dearest Angelica. So for any of you who are not English majors, and this is going completely over your head, let's discuss grammar. What is this episode today? I just like truly riveting content here. And Effed Up History, what is this episode today? So commas are fun. Commas are powerful. If I were to write, I like cooking my friends and cats with no commas, I will sound like a cannibalistic psychopathic monster. Commas save lives. I will write with the Oxford comma until the end of my days, and fucking AP stylistic guidelines that refuse the use of the Oxford comma almost made me quit my copy editor job. Commas are an obscure area of intense passion for me. So my dearest Angelica without the comma would just be like a typical beginning to a letter. It would be the same as writing Dear John or whatever. So just like a comma can save lives in the cooking example I gave, commas can also apply a lot. So by putting a comma between dearest and Angelica, writing my dearest comma Angelica, it's now saying that Angelica is now an object that is the most dear to Alexander in the world, which is fucked up when you think about it, considering that he has a spouse and multiple children at this point, and so does Angelica. And yet in the play, she's wasting away thinking about this comma and speculating as to the meaning and implications of that small line. But the reality of this is a little different, because Angelica would not be speculating as to the meaning and implications, because she was the one who did it first. It was a letter from 1787 when she wrote, my dear, comma, sir, right? Saying that he, Hamilton, is her dear, which is terminology you should probably call your husband, right? But no, she wrote this to Alexander. And in his response, he was like, you dumb women and your lack of understanding of punctuation. Don't you know that the comma changed the meaning? Unless that's what you meant. In that case, Angelica, do you like me or do you like me? Please check the box yes or no and pass it back when the teacher's not looking. And then he signed off in like a similar writing, adieu, my dear, comma, sister, which is him responding that he felt the same. This is just like truly riveting smut here. I cannot handle the amount of spice that who needs porn when you have commas? Gonna have to take a break and go take a cold shower after this. But every time Angelica would come back to America from England, often without her husband and children, by the way, rumors would just spread about what kind of relationship they had, because their relationship went far beyond punctuation, and they were super flirtatious in an appropriate way at times, like when he would steal her garter from her. And that whole line in Helpless, so if you haven't seen the play, there's a song Helpless that's sung by Eliza, talking about how she's just so helplessly in love. And Angelica says that if Eliza really loved Angelica, that she would share Alexander with her. That is true. She said this in a letter to Eliza, saying, quote, I love him very much, and if you were as generous as the old Romans, you would lend him to me for a little while, which is a whole new meaning to the Roman wife idea, if you ask me, which leads me to ask, did Alexander mean more by the Roman wife comments to Eliza in his early letters? When he was saying, you will be the Roman wife, was he meaning that you will be strong and tenacious and all this kind of stuff? Or was he also saying that you will be okay with me having extramarital affairs? I don't know. There's no evidence that they had a physical affair, but there's also no evidence that they didn't have a physical affair. So by Chernow standards of if we don't explicitly deny it, then it happened, then they fucked like rabbits. I'm going to say I don't personally think they had a physical affair, but they definitely had an emotional one. And that hurt so much more than just a physical affair, I think. Like, if my husband were to come up to me and be like, I slept with someone else, it meant absolutely nothing, I don't feel anything for them, like, I would be hurt. I don't know if he would ever recover from that. We'd have to try to like gain back trust, but we might, after some work, be able to move past that. But if he were to come up to me and tell me that he was in love with someone else and they hadn't done anything physical yet, but he was in love with them, I would be heartbroken and devastated. If he were to walk up to me and use some of this language that they used with each other, commas and all, I would never trust anyone again and we would immediately get divorced. So that is another issue that I have with the play as opposed to real life, because in the play, Angelica makes this big deal of like choosing her sister's happiness over her own happiness and then engages in an emotional affair, where in real life, historically, Angelica was just a flirt. Hamilton wasn't even the only member of Washington's cabinet that she was involved with, allegedly. So there's this little man named Thomas Jefferson. Maybe you've heard of him. Well, Thomas Jefferson was known to be quite flirtatious, I'll say, especially with married women. He may have fancied himself a little bit of a Henry VIII there. He met Angelica in 1787. They didn't start having an affair right away. In fact, in 1787, they met because she acted as the liaison between him and a married woman named Maria Causeway. So she clearly had no problems with people cheating on their spouses, which is probably why she saw nothing wrong with this emotional, if not physical, affair with Alexander. But eventually, Jefferson did turn his attention towards Angelica. He sent her portraits of himself. She gave him books in return. And then he was like, hey, I'm going to America. You should come visit me in Monticello. Or I could come see you in New York and we could just go travel around Niagara Falls or whatever, just the two of us, staying in with one bed, you know? Now, Chernow says that their flirtations never came to anything because she chose Hamilton over Jefferson. But he also said that because Rachel Lavian didn't show up in court to face her abuser, that she was clearly guilty. So the evidence to me stacks up a lot more that Angelica may have had an affair with Thomas Jefferson than Rachel did when she was thrown into prison. And to be totally fair here, Angelica wasn't the only one who Hamilton may have been involved with. There were multiple reports about him flirting with married and unmarried women and husbands telling their wives to stay away from him. One man called him an insatiable libertine. And then there's that whole famous Reynolds affair. And that is where I'm going to end today, because the Reynolds affair is a lot and is quite complex and may not have even happened and was just part of a grand cover-up scheme to help Hamilton and his friends and family stay out of federal prison. So tune in next time for that. It's going to be a super fun time. I apologize for my unhinged rants today. Very passionate about these women, I guess. So if you like what you heard and you'd like to hear more, especially about this affair and most likely rants again in the future, please consider subscribing or leaving a review or joining my Patreon. And remember, friends, history may be watching you, so don't fuck it up and watch what you do with your commas, because commas save lives and also justice for Peggy. Bye.